But let's hit, you see, it's all very, I think everyone knows the concerns, the challenges in a way, but how do you initiate? The word reform has been used by several of you. So I'm going to ask you for specific reforms that you would have. Neelkanth, you go first. What is that specific reform? The Prime Minister speaks of a reform express in 2025. And yes, there have been attempts made. The Labour Code, for example, kicks in now in a month or so. Do you believe that enough is being done? And what would you now like to see to in a way give the animal spirits of the economy, of the investors, an opportunity to actually put their money where their mouth is, in a way?
So the very fact that the pace of fiscal consolidation is now easing. So we did about 80 basis points of explicit consolidation in FY25. If you include the off-balance sheet changes on the GST compensation cess, FY25 fiscal year that ended in March 25 was 130 basis points of fiscal consolidation. This year we had 40 basis points of fiscal consolidation. In the next year, the fiscal consolidation will be lower. So in a way, the government is now done with the hard miles on fiscal consolidation, and therefore the economy should start doing better. So there is not, I think, any pressing need to do all the fiscal stimulus in the budget itself. But you're absolutely right. I think the working environment, the operating environment, from what I see, a number of the recommendations from the Rajiv Gauba committee, which is giving recommendations on a frequent basis. It's not a one-time committee. But there are several of them, including the rescinding of quality control orders, which seems very nerdy and too detailed. But I think the impact on some sectors, especially like apparel exports, can be substantial. So there are many such measures that are already underway. It would be great if some of those also are further announced in the budget speech. As we discussed earlier, there's not much room for fiscal giveaways and not much of flexibility on the budget side. And the government has attempted to make budgets much more predictable than they used to be, which is a good thing. And therefore, a number of the exciting features can come in the budget speech. And in that speech, in terms of reforms, I think greater clarity and certainty on the taxation side. This is something that, including some of the decisions that recently came from the Supreme Court, there are new types of concerns which are emerging among investors. I think certainty on the direct tax side, simplification of procedures and processes, decriminalization of many of the potential offenses. So we are aware that many such attempts are underway in the government. They are exploring many such changes. Easing those would be too much detail. It's not very good for headlines, but they can have a substantial impact on the growth momentum over the medium term.
You know, because Sajid Chinoy, a word that I heard in Davos last week was not ease of doing business, but the speed of doing business. And yet I hear from MSMEs that many of the regulatory compliances are still far too burdensome. So is the first instance, do you believe reform, how do you make it a speed of doing business if you have so many regulatory compliances still in place?
Rajdeep, you're right. I think, the whole focus on deregulation from the economic survey, is to try and improve the ease of doing business. And it's in a world where there's so much Chinese excess capacity, which threatens our small, medium enterprises. You don't want to shackle these SMEs by giving them more compliances. But let me answer your original question. What specific reform does one advocate? Yes. It's very clear to me what the near-term objective should be. We all agree the near-term objective has to be to jumpstart private investment. So the question is, what is ailing private investment? And in my mind, it's basically demand visibility. Balance sheets are very strong, cash levels are high, profits are high. But in a world with so much excess capacity in China, businesses need to see more visible demand. A lot of that demand has to come from exports. I've said this before, only 13 economies in the last 100 years have grown at an average of 7% for 20 years. And those 13 economies had one thing in common, very strong export growth. And, I'm very encouraged that in the last 6 months, the government has not succumbed to export pessimism and is on this, a raft of free trade deals have been signed. But the question is, what do we need to do to succeed and to create a force multiplier for those free trade deals? And in my mind, the specific reform has to be to clean up the customs duty part. The oldest adage is an import duty is like an export tax. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity on the back of all these FTAs for the budget to attempt a significant simplification and cleaning up of import duties, tariffs, and non-tariff barriers. If in a world of global value chains, it's only when you get that ease of imports will you be able to succeed on exports. I think that's a very tangible thing the government can do. It will reinforce the impression that we are serious about export-led growth, in this difficult and hostile global environment.
I'm going to put up a graphic in a moment also, of course, of the falling rupee, because there are concerns of that. And the economic survey also admitted that the rupee is punching below its weight. But Pranjal, what is that key reform that you would like to see to ensure that we have a test match mood and not T20?
Yeah, I'm going to follow on that analogy. I think we've taken some very good steps on external reforms already. We were dragging our feet on many of these trade agreements, but we've signed several of them, one with EU, one with UK, New Zealand, and many more in the offing in the next year or so. So I think that's great. We've cancelled a lot of the quality control orders. We seem to be, having a softer approach to China. At least, we've resumed some of the flights and all of that. I think these are sort of great ways to integrate back with global growth. My sense is that I think this was the missing piece why private investment wasn't taking off. Exports were very weak. But then there is one thing we've still not done, and I'm hoping that this is something we take forward, which is look east. All of this while we are looking west, we are having trade agreements with the EU, with UK. But what about looking east? What about a relationship with ASEAN, where a lot of the manufacturing happens? Can we partner with ASEAN in this global value chain? Can we be more open to Chinese FDI? Perhaps not in very sensitive or strategic goods, but what about mid-tech goods like textiles, footwear, furniture? I think a lot of partnerships can happen here. Look at Vietnam, getting all of these Chinese FDI in mid-tech goods and growing 7.5% per year. I think these are great opportunities out there that we should really try to get. And the final one is the rupee. I'm very glad that it came up in a big way in the economic survey. I think the currency at this point depreciating is not a bad thing because it's an offset to this 50% tariff that we have from the US. It helps make our exports competitive. You will never have, any economy really increasing their exports over time with a very overvalued and a very strong currency. So I think these are good steps. We're making the right noises. The economic survey had a lot of gold in it. And my sense is, I think we're on the right track. We just keep working on all of these reforms.
Before just to push you on the point you made about China, do you believe, therefore, and anyone can please feel free to dip in on that. Sajid, if you want to respond to what you heard from Pranjal, because you also spoke just now about earlier about the need to be perhaps a little bit more adventurous. Are you saying that we should be also looking at, do you agree with Pranjal that we should be looking east as well, not just at an EU deal, but looking at possible ways of strengthening trade ties with China, where we have a huge trade imbalance at the moment?
Is that for me?
Yes, go ahead, sir.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with Pranjal in the following sense. The most dynamic region of the world in the next 20, 30 years is going to be Asia. Most global growth is going to come from Asia. So we need to do two things. A, we need to integrate better with Asia and have more free trade agreements with them. And I've been advocating we should be joining next after the EU deal, among the largest free trade regions, frameworks in the world, which is the CPTPP, which has got 15% of global trade flows through that. So that will be the next goal. With China, the fact is we have to learn to live with China. China has got the kind of excess capacity that nobody else has. It has the manufacturing prowess and the technological capability that nobody else has. So India will be very reliant on Chinese intermediate goods for a long period of time. The choice we can make is, do we want to import that or do we want to attract more Chinese FDI? And I'm very much in the latter camp that, I understand geopolitical considerations, but we should be thinking of easing Press Note 3 and attracting more Chinese FDI. That does two things. There will be some technological transfer And that value add, a lot of that value add will accrue to India. It'll create jobs in India rather than us importing from China. So we have to learn to create a better relationship between these two. One final thing I'll say, Rajdeep, a lot of hand wringing about the rupee. The rupee is a symptom. What India needs to work on is on attracting capital flows and stable capital flows on foreign direct investment. And some of the things that have been said, including simplifying the tariff regime, import tariff regime, simplifying some of the restraints in China will help us attract more FDI.
Soumya Kanti Ghosh, what structural reforms are needed to sustain the FDI inflows in a volatile global environment? I look at RBI data, November 2025 saw net FDI outflow of $446 million. This comes on the back of $1.67 billion of outflow in October. So this is another major challenge. Do you see the budget providing any kind of direction in terms of structural reforms that are needed?
Yeah, thank you, Rajdeep. I think I will venture out a little differently in terms of addressing the reforms which needs to be done at this point of time. While I agree with the fact that customs rationalization is the need of the hour, because we have done on the direct taxes first, then you have addressed the indirect taxes. Now is the time to clean up the customs tax. But apart from that, on the rupee front, if you're asking me, from the last January 25 till January 2026 till today, there's been total outflow of around 17 billion US. So as long as this portfolio is capital flow doesn't stabilize, I think I don't see the rupees settling soon at the current level. It will continue to be volatile, and it will also depend on how the pace of the other trade deals.
No, but should we be concerned about it? Some of the guests suggest we shouldn't be too concerned about it. Do you believe we should be concerned about a volatile rupee?
See, at the end of the day, I think there is both an yes and a no to it. Yes, there is some part, there should be a little amount of concern in the sense that if the rupee continues to depreciate, there could be a self-fulfilling prophecy of declining it further. On the other hand, the argument that rupee could act as a shock absorber is also correct. But in my sense, I think continued depreciation of the rupee also sometimes creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, which could take it down to lower levels, and which is exactly has been emphasized in the economic survey, where we're saying that the rupee is actually punching much below its weight. Because if you look at the trade deficit data of the last year and this year, it is hardly any different. So there is no macroeconomic reason to suggest that why the rupee should be depreciating. So keeping aside those facts, I think there are a couple of reforms which I would like to mention. I think the first thing is on the agricultural sector. I think for the last couple of years, we have done a lot on the SME sector. We have introduced a credit guarantee scheme, which has been largely successful. I think now is the time for the agricultural sector maybe to unveil an omnibus credit guarantee scheme, which exists from the SME sector, and also to redefine the agricultural value chain in the Indian context, so that the sector gets fund and investment, which is unfortunately a little absent in India. The second important thing, which is also very important for a country like India for the ease of living, is the urban infrastructure. You have seen that how cities after cities in India last year has been ravaged by floods and urban infrastructure. So I think it's high time now that the local bodies, specifically the urban and the rural local bodies, and also the government takes up the reforms of the urban infrastructure in the right earnest. I think the government has made the move in the right direction in the past. It's now high time that is actually operationalizing it. The final point which I will mention is also a very important point, is that I think the government has introduced a very successful land scheme, cardholder scheme, which is called the Shramik scheme for the rural households. I think the time has come possibly for the urban households to have a scheme like that. If we can introduce a scheme whereby you give property cards to the urban population, that actually would also help in urbanization, making it competitive for the industry to know which urban piece of land they can use for industrialization. Because as of today, it's a very politically sensitive issue in the Indian context, these land reforms or this taking up lands for industrial purposes. So I think some sort of reforms in this sector would help a long way in making the urban land market competitive, and also help in the urban infrastructural process, which we badly need today.